beauty lighting. Got a really great photographer that we're going to look at today, Jason Kim. And I've got to say, for me, this is the most fun I've had making one of these tutorials so far. I love the photographer's work, but also I've really been trying to come from an angle of how can I present some solutions if you've got constant lighting or you've got strobe lighting and you only have 2 lights or you've got lots of lights to play with. So hopefully what you'll find if you watch this video all the way through, there's lots of things that you can try. And it's fairly fluid, this video. I just moved through the areas that you should be looking at when you're working with beauty. And those main elements of layering light, how you structure your light, how you may be working with a soft light or a more direct contrasty light. So I think there's a lot to learn and experiment with. And a photographer's got such great work. And it ranges from big beauty campaigns, super commercial, to what looks like more personal portfolio shoots and test shoots. Really recommend that you go and have a look at his website and his Instagram. It's super inspiring. We're going to be looking at this shoot. Really beautiful makeup looks created. I love the model, but also I love all of his model casting and also his retouching. Like a shoot like this, there's a lot of good skin detail still. And I know that beauty moves in trends and waves, but there's good texture here. Everything looks very real. This color work is just fantastic. And also the hair, there's a real delicate precision to everything that happens in the imagery. He works really nicely with highlights, kind of almost pushing it to the limit, but really helps define his imagery and has a real understanding of how to shoot different skin types. I really love the glossy lip in both these images, especially when it's paired against this sort of fairly neutral skin. Again, more beautiful color work, some great lighting on these lips. I think this is earlier work, the flower stuff, and he seems to use a lot of large lighting surfaces, which is why I think it's good to work through this. As always with these videos, they should be your starting point or to begin to understand how you could build light. And never saying this is the lighting setup that the photographer themselves use, but we'll take elements from that and build on that idea of beauty lighting. These are so fun, the flower ones. Delicate work, but strong models. It's got a 70s vibe, this one. And like I said, I've got a strobe set, I've got a constant set, and I just switch between the two depending on what area I'm looking at. And look at this beautiful video work that he does. See that big light source in the catch lights of the eyes. So yeah, big round of applause to Jason Kim, doing great work. I hope you enjoy this one. And if you do watch it, if you can subscribe, that will really help me. I'm trying to get a sponsor right now. You know how it goes. So the more numbers I have, the more chance I'll get of getting a sponsor and keep making these videos. So let's get into it. Hope you enjoy. So let's bring the image in. And this is what we're going to work towards. And I can't obviously reproduce this makeup, but I've got something similar. Sweep that back out. Look at the studio that we've got. I'll zoom out. Got a big space here. We're definitely not using all of the space. You could do this in a fairly small space right now. And also this here where the posed model is, you would probably have some kind of posing table, something for the model to lean on that would just really help with that setup. Or at the very least some kind of stool or something. So it looks a little bit odd at the start. The ceiling height is 6 meters and then it's 9 by 9 meters and we don't use all of that. Now let's go to first camera settings, and this is a strobe set. We'll be doing both. I've got ISO 400, aperture 5.6, and a shutter speed of 125. Obviously shutter speed we don't really need to worry about because we're using strobe. And we're starting off with these 2 octa boxes, and I've got an octa 100 and slightly larger one on the other side is octa 120. This 120 is just going to be going for the background, but at the minute you'll see if I put it on solo light and we can look at it from above, light is obviously going to hit the model. So we need to do something about that. And we've got it on 6.3. Then our main light, our key light, 6.8. Let's look at this in terms of height. It's quite high, angling down, as we always look at. That's going to be more flattering on the face. Bring this back in again. And obviously with beauty, there's always a difference between like what it's shot as kind of raw and what the post-production is. But you can see this nice kind of gradient and cheekbone shaping that's happening here. We've got a soft light that's coming across the hand. Super glossy lipstick, but we're still catching highlight across the lips. And this bright kind of like T-spot here. Nice clean background. So with our solo light, we're beginning to get that. And let's just see in this image here, we're getting this sort of hot spot down here. It's maybe a little bit too hot at this point. On the octa, we have got a grid, internal and external diffusion. If I flick between a couple of those, we can see if we take the grid off, we're getting a wider spread of light as we notice. Grid we know narrows things down. Just an internal diffusion, too much light is hitting the model, but also it's maybe a little bit sort of too high contrast, too high key. If we were to take that off completely and just have the grid, again, that's kind of too intense. We could turn the power down on those things, but right now I'm just starting off with internal, external diffusion and a grid. This is our base image. It's kind of a good starting point. The reason I've chosen octas over another modifier shape. It's a bit more pleasing with the catch lights and eyes. It's a nice deep octa. I don't necessarily want like a big rectangular softbox, although I could use one of those. But then what we need to do is we need to control this light. And I've just thrown all of these things at once because if you've watched any of the other videos, you'll be aware how we need to start to control light. But let's just do these things one by one. So I've got a bounce board in here. This is just like white polyboard, foam core, any sort of fairly white surface would do. And I can bring it up or down, preview image on the side where that's changing, but I'm just trying to bounce some light back in so it's softening off this area. It's not super heavy under the chin, but I don't want it like really illuminated. I don't want an obvious light source coming from below. So what you need to do with this is just vary that angle until you get something that you're happy with. Then look at the black flags. The main thing that this black flag is doing is you saw when we had this as just a solar light, a lot of the light was hitting the model, but now we've got this clear silhouette. So we're not pushing a lot of light past the model, that's a good thing. But if we view it from above, this black poly is just stopping that light. The other thing, let's just look at a preview image here on just judging how much we need on this background light. So it's on 6.3. Let's just put it all the way up at the minute, put it on 10. You can see we're getting light bleed back through past the model, and that would be affecting our exposure. So we always want to take like test shot with just the background lights just to see how much light is coming through and if it's changing our overall exposure. Then on the other side, this is kind of key for us here to bring that shape into the face. So bringing this image in again, this edge quality that we've got here, negative fill is going to work best right now because I want to keep this setup fairly simple. Beauty isn't always simple, and this photographer is probably using more shaping control, maybe more lights than this. But if you want to get something similar in like a home studio or rental, then this will get you pretty close. So let's just have a look at those lights separately again. Now we'll put this as a solo light and see the difference with the polyboard now. If we were to take this polyboard away, then we would lose some of that really nice shaping, kind of contouring that we've got here. The other thing that we can do with this is we can vary the height on here. So if we put it more flat, we change the shape of the face to some extent. If we put it up more, we're going to shape the face in a different way. There's always a balance that you got to get to with like how high you want to put this light. If you put it too high, then you'll start to see this shadow creep into the eye socket, and then you begin to need another fill light that comes in from the front or below. So let's just bring that back to where it was. Let's just look at it from the model's kind of perspective because that's quite useful. So we've got this octa here with a grid on it. It's directing that light towards the model's face, and then this light is the one that's obviously hitting the background, and the model is kind of between these polyboards. There's enough space for the model here, but when you're shooting beauty, you're not moving around that much. It's all going to be quite static, and it's like minor adjustments that you'll need to do. We could look at that though and say, actually, maybe the separation on the nose is a little too obvious. Maybe we want to soften the light even more because this photographer has beautiful soft light, sometimes quite high contrast, but sometimes really soft light as well. So from what we know in the past, we want to make our light source as big as possible, really. Now, the quickest way that we could do that is put some kind of diffusion frame in. So that's exactly what we've done here. I've kept the light, the main light, the octa, in the same place, and I've added a diffusion panel. Now, this is like 150 by 150, but it could be like 1 meter by meter, 2 meter by 2 meter, or if you're in America, like 4 by 4, 6 by 6, so on. The larger we make this light source, the softer the light is going to be when it hits the model. And I've got like a 0.75 on here. You'll find that when you get diffusion panels, you could have like a third stop, half stop, one stop. I've looked at those in other videos as well, but it's just about how much light is going to pass through this, but also to be aware some light is going to bounce around the space. So let's put the octa back as a solo light. And I think the things to be aware of here is this change of catch light now. Because we've introduced a much bigger light source, the catch lights have changed a little. I'm going to just process both of these images with just the octa, the key light, so we can compare the two side by side. So let's look at the eyes for a second. See what I mean here? We've got this big, fairly distinctive, almost like big panel catch light here. And we've just got the bottom of the octa coming in here into the catch light in the eyes. I think with catch lights, it's really important to try and decide like how do they match the feel of the overall picture of the shot. So this quite soft catch light is kind of nice for the overall softness of the light that we've got. Maybe the hard edge isn't perfect, but we could adjust that a little if we needed to. What else is happening? Let's just look at the nose on both these images. So the one on the right with the big soft panel, it's just a softer highlight across the nose. Whereas without that diffusion, highlight on the nose is kind of like two key points. The tip of the nose is like one highlight, and then we've got this line here, and they're kind of quite separate and distinct. When we soften the light up here, we've kind of merged those together. There's a little bit of difference in the posing of the mouth here. I don't know, I must have saved something differently, but there's a slightly different highlight on the lip. Again, bigger light source, going to be softer. The fall off between like the light and shade and the contouring between this image and this image, again, it's a really subtle difference, and you would have to really test that with the model that you're working with. But bigger light source, we're going to expect a smoother or more subtle fall off. Let's go back and take them back off the solo lights again. Now we're comparing them with both lights back on, so the background light as well. Slight exposure difference on the face, and the reason for that is if we look at the image from the model's point of view again, you'll notice that the grid has been taken off. I don't think there's much point me having a grid on the Octa if I'm then putting the diffusion panel in, because remember, I want to make that light kind of as big and as soft as possible. And those three steps, baseline strobe without the negative fill and the fill underneath the chin, and then the set with the Octa without a diffusion panel, and then with a diffusion panel. Now it's a little bit bright here, so I'm going to bring that down again. What's it on? Did I say 8.3? Let's just bring it down to like 7, 8, so that we've got a similar exposure between the two images. So that's without the diffusion panel, and that's with the diffusion panel, just so we're really comparing like so 7.8, maybe that's a little bit too low now. Maybe I'd need to put it up to 8, something like that. But you can see that when you're making those small adjustments with diffusion panels, you're going to be changing the power and making little tweaks here and there. Now what I could do if I want to increase the kind of feeling of the makeup slightly, I could then begin to put another fill in here. So I could have, say, a beauty dish, and if I was going to have a beauty dish, I would maybe situate it somewhere like here, so it's just pushing in towards the model. That might be one way to go. And it's really about like refining. What is your base image, and then how do you want to refine working with the makeup? But we also want to look at this from a constant lighting setup, because also the photographer is using a lot of video in their work. So I'm going to start off with aperture. I've got the 600 pros. You could swap it out for a 300. You would just need to change the ISO that you're shooting at. But let's have a look at the ISO that we've got in a minute. I've got ISO 800. I've opened up a lot now, so I'm at f4. ISO 800 is still going to be fairly clean depending on what camera you're working on. And then if I look at our lights, spin around here so that we can see what we've got for it. We've got the light dome 2. On this one, I've also got a light dome 2. I use light domes. I think they're nice. I also could suggest you could use a lantern. And all I've done is I've just swapped them in exactly in the placement that we had the octas before. I've left our negative fill and our bounce in the same place. With the light dome, we've got the internal and external diffuser, so we're trying to make it quite soft. If we look at those catch lights in the eyes, it is still quite a noticeable light. Again, looking at this image, let's just drag this back in. Maybe we've got too much of a feeling of kind of contour and fade off into darkness along the jawline. And especially up here, you notice it's a little bit dark in the kind of hairline detail above the ear. And the thing with beauty, again, you want to really be look at your capture screen if you're using capture, and really understand like what is it you're looking for, where are the areas that need to improve. So the first thing that we could do is look at this negative fill and say, okay, maybe that negative fill is too much. So let's swap it out with a positive. Let's just put a white polyboard in. And I'll put this as a solo light so we can just look at what that light is doing. And what we're looking at is this kind of edge down the side here, just seeing how much is that poly lifted up as opposed to when it's on a solo light with the black negative fill. Let's compare those side by side. So I'm going to apply that change now. So it's just the front light on this one. Let's process those. So quite a big change. Less of a feeling of contour down the side of the face here with the white polyboard, much more with the negative fill. Quite a difference also what we're seeing across here where the mouse is right now. It's a little bit lighter. It's quite heavy on this side. Again, you could always do this with the second light, but if we're thinking like, how do we do this and try and save costs or work within budget or the equipment we've got, then let's always just go with polyboards and flags and negative fill when we need to shape the light. Other things that have changed though, quite a distinct catch light now. Quite distracting because that white polyboard is really catching in the eye. Take that back off the solo, take that back off the solo. The reason I want to compare it with also the background light on is maybe the difference that you're seeing in contrast from one side of the face to the other is kind of knocked out a little bit when you've got that background light on. So here maybe it does look too dark and heavy with the background light on. Maybe everything evens out quite nicely with the background light on this side. It's something like this where we're kind of shaping, where we're looking at like the temple. Bring the reference image in so we can see this is makeup all the way up here. Without the white polyboard that we've got in here, maybe it becomes too heavy. Maybe this becomes much too deep a red. And again, with beauty, it's really important that you are looking at the makeup at the same time as you're kind of working with your lighting. Again, with this constant light, we could bring this up, Could bring it down. We have to be really careful when we're making changes like this. So we may need to move this fill card across, and you can see that changes even in the preview at the minute. Begin to kind of work out our angle now so that we are either firing light down into this fill card and bouncing it back up, or we're firing the light kind of past, and we're trying to catch almost that incidental light that's coming down, and we're pushing that back up into the chin. Next thing we can do is we can put a diffusion panel back on. Let's look at this from the top now. See this key light that I've moved around when I put the diffusion panel on. I'm trying to create a bigger light source, and I'm creating it a little bit more central now. I don't really want a large light source far off to the side. So bringing that key light just a little bit more central will help. Taking off the external diffuser, and I'm just going with the internal one because I'm pushing back into this big surface area. I've still got the same setup for the diffusion panels I had before. So it's 1.5 meters, 0.75. Oh, and then the other thing that I have done is I've put the negative fill back on this side because I've made a larger surface area, a softer light. So let's compare those. Again, just checking the preview image on the side, you can see what I've got here. So this is the black poly, then I've got it with the white poly, and then we've got the larger fusion panel with the black poly, negative fill. And this one to me, on the far side, seems to work quite nicely. It's closest to what I would see with the reference image. Pull it back in again, put it back on the side. So I want this combination of like shaping the face, getting this nice contour here, getting the shaping down the side, but getting enough light into the face. Let's have a look at this one. Slightly hard nose shadow here, softened off that nose shadow. So this one, obviously the big diffusion panel, this one in the middle is without the diffusion panel, and it's with the white fill card, giving us that extra shadow here that's not sort of super nice for a beauty shot. This one is a little smoother and softer. Looking at that highlight that's on the nose, with the diffusion panel, we're just softening off that highlight, fitting it together quite nicely. The real change in the catch lights, these catch lights, they're sort of annoying me. They come forward too much. They look a little bit harsh. Then with that big diffusion panel and a fairly soft light going into it, we've got a nice catch light. It's not super noticeable. And then just to compare, I put the white polyboard back in. So black polyboard, white polyboard. You'll see the white polyboard in the catch lights. It's maybe softening the area too much here. Maybe the contour shape that we've got sort of at the temple is nicer on that side than it is with the white polyboard. Negative and positive fill, you really just have to work out how much you're going to angle things, how close is it going to be. I've had setups in the past, could be fairly common also with other photographers, where I've maybe got like a half and half. So I've got like a white poly, but then I've got an area that I've like blacked out, just some black paper, for example, you could tape into a space there. You can also get different kind of reflectors like zebra reflectors and so on that just provide a different way of bouncing light in, and it's not always so obvious. So you'll begin to know what works for you. Now I want to look at how we can control things a little bit more carefully, and also maybe we don't have a diffusion panel available to us. Maybe you don't have one of these here. Maybe you've got another light. So let's have a look at how we could do something like that. So let's just concentrate on this. The background light stays the same. Let's look from above. That's probably an easier way of seeing it. So we're pulling things back out, and then we're kind of staggering these two lights now. So let's put them one by one. If this is a solo light now, 65%. Before it was 79, 80 because we're pushing it through that diffusion panel, but also I've pulled it back now. It's not going through a diffusion panel. I have an internal and external diffuser, and I'm at 66. And let's look at that solo light. Quite contrasty, quite shadowy down the face. It's quite central into the face. We'd expect that. And then this fill light, it's the same diffusion panel. Let's put that as a solo. And this is really low. So I'm at quarter power right now. Look at it on its own in the preview image. You can see it's very uplighty. And we have to always be careful when we're putting uplight, especially in beauty. There's a little shine right in the center of the forehead, a little shine on the nose, but we know it's going to even things out when we've got that key light. So let's just turn the background light off so we're not distracted by that. And it's just these two lights that we're looking at now in our preview image. A little bit disconnected with the catch lights, a little bit separate, but that's because it's two clear separate lights now. We could move those lights closer together. That would kind of even things out. And let's just compare those changes that we've made. So this is with the white polyboard and the diffusion panel. And then on the right hand side, it's with the two light domes. My feeling is it's cleaner. It looks a little bit more contrasty though. It's cleaning up the nose shadow on this side. It's putting a nice highlight on the waterline of the eye. Shaping the face fairly nicely. It's a little bit sort of maybe potentially blown out in the forehead. And we could balance that by just bringing that key light down in power. So bringing this light down. Look at it from the top. Again, we're still using these negative fills to contour. We could bring this in closer if we want to get more of a feeling of contouring on the face. But the other thing that we could do is bring these lights back up and have our diffusion panel again. We're trying to kind of spread the light, make that big surface area for the light. I don't want my catch lights to be too separate. So my diffusion panel is a way of doing that. Let's just zoom in. And if you look at this, I've got the same thing on both internal diffusion. I don't have the external one because I'm just pushing it into this big panel here. I've got like a half stop for my material that I'm pushing through. Let's look at it from the model's point of view again. We've got this big surface area. The benefit for this is that we're not stuck in a kind of rigid way of thinking in terms of what our posing could be. Our model can move her head left and right. We can shoot video, and it just gives us a little bit more range than if we were to have something like this, where actually maybe when the model moves left or right, it becomes a little bit unflattering because we're kind of quite angled with two fairly separate light sources, and bringing it to a bigger, softer area can work quite nicely. So this is the two light domes separately, and then this is the big diffusion panel. Areas for me to look at: shadow around the nose, it's a little nicer, not so hard edged. Again, you can retouch these things in post, but you're trying to get the most kind of clean image that you can when you're shooting beauty. I think it's quite helpful that the clothing is doing this weird shape here, because it also allows us to see we've got this quite contrasty shadow here, and then with a larger light source, it's a much softer shadow. You wouldn't have that blocking the face, but it's just helpful to see actually this is the impact of having this big diffusion panel. Softens those shadows off completely. I still got that bounce card underneath as well, and you can see it a little bit in the eyes. Again, that can be distracting. You're really trying to finesse things with beauty, and just really be aware like any change you make could make quite a dramatic change in what you see in the eyes. We also have to start to think with beauty, like how much space do you have to work in and move around in? Where's the photographer going? Are they actually like stood here photographing? All of those things like get quite important when you're getting your final adjustments. I found sometimes I do a setup that I'm quite like, but then realize I sort of boxed myself in. Let's look at it from above. Try and keep things as like organized as you can so that people can move in and out, like hair and makeup. We want to make like tiny adjustments on set. You don't want your model keep walking off set. If we're happy with a constant lighting setup, and that all makes sense, and it's fairly straightforward, I feel. Let's look if we don't have the modifiers available. These light domes can be fairly expensive to buy, but also just to show you that you could just have the standard aperture reflector, fairly harsh light that you get at the beginning as part of the kit. But actually it's going to work quite nicely because we've got this diffusion panel. I've increased it to 3/4 stop now, so you could maybe have like a 1 stop if you wanted to. How much light are you pushing through? How much power do you have available for you in your lights? So, you know, maybe you do need a half stop, maybe you just pull it back a little bit. It's always about balance. But I've got these on the same power, 72, 72. So I'm just trying to make this like big light source here. So this is with the lantern on the diffusion, and this is with the 2 heads on the diffusion panel. It's helpful to look at the levels on the top right. First version, second version, not a huge difference. Nice and soft, a little bit harder edge under the chin. Maybe the fall off from light to shade is a little bit more aggressive in this one than it is here, but overall it works quite nicely. So fairly simple way of doing that. Depending on the size of the diffusion panel that you've got and how close it is to the model, we could stagger the lights that we've got. So I'm pushing this one a little higher above, and then this one a little further down, and I've got this almost at full power, and this is like 3/4 power. Let's put these as solar lights so we can see. What I'm trying to do with this is just shape the face, bring that kind of nice highlight onto cheekbones that we're always trying to work with. So I've gone up higher, pulled it out to the side. This one I'm sort of going fairly flat into the face. So this is our like main key light, essentially, I would say. And then this is our fill. But really, when we're putting them both into a big diffusion panel, they just become like one key light. If key light and fill light are confusing to you, don't worry about it too much. It's like we're just trying to light this big surface area. And I've put more of the light coming directly from the front. And you wouldn't see it as perfectly clearly as this, but you can see these kind of overlapping circles of light. A little bit more emphasis in one part of the frame than the other. So this is them even together, and then this is with them staggered. It's subtle, but you'll see it on a real person. This is just shaping the face in a nicer way. Just these little things like this little kind of shadow area that's happening, pulling everything out, using that space of the diffusion panel. And what you could do also with this, let me just spin it back around. Okay, maybe I want this one to be the more dominant, so this is shaping the face, and then I'll pull the power down on this side. Making those subtle changes with your diffusion, we can always bring this in or out depending on how much you want to shape and contour. Another way that we could do this very much becomes about like positioning, but we could bounce the light. So I just flip these heads around. I push them into diffusion panel. I've got like a 1 stop now. I don't want all the light to like pass through my diffusion panel. Really what I want it to do is bounce back and fill in. So let me just angle the head so you can see pushing that light back in towards the model. I'm going to get a bit of bounce from this fill card. Super, super soft. Things you would need to consider with this is like, what is your material? Is it just diffusion panel. You could have like an ultra bounce, for example, that is going to push more light back in. It's going to give you more of those like highlights. If you are bouncing the light like this, it's softer, but it's less controllable. Camera person that's moving left or right, are you going to end up like blocking the light? This is something to consider, but it's a good thing to have a look at because there's quite a big difference here. So this is the staggered light through the diffusion panel. This is the bounce light onto the diffusion panel. Really, really soft. Because I can only get a certain amount of power out of these lights and they're both on 100%, I've had to open up my f-stop. So I was on 5.6 before, put it on 5.6. You can see the preview image and how that changes. Super dark. So I want to open up and shoot on f4. Because we're pushing the light away and we're bouncing it back in towards the model, we've lost a huge amount of light. Look at them side by side. So you can see a complete difference here in the way that it renders. Again, this is a virtual simulation, right? So you won't lose as much like detail in the lips as this is lost. We've got shooting through the panel evenly, shooting through diffusion panel but staggered with shaping the face, and then bouncing. 3 different light qualities. Now you may think this is straight away from the original image because I want to show you how you can begin to kind of refine and work with your own setups. And then what I can do, bouncing the light into my diffusion panel, and we know that's going to give us that super soft kind of feeling. It's a little underexposed right now. And then I'm going to add another light and push this back into the face. So let's compare those. That's the bounce light only. And then this is the bounce light, but then the fill. We could refine this. It's really good to look at what are the key things that we notice. Because I'm pushing that light back into the face now, I've suddenly got that highlight back onto the lip. And that's great. That's what I want. Let's just have a look at that in the setup again. This is our lantern. Put this on the solar light. That's giving us that nice highlight on the tip of the nose, across the nose here, highlight in the forehead, great highlight on the lips. Larger version. This is just the light dome. Obviously it's too dark, but that's where our fill comes in from these bounce lights. Gives us again a bit more range of movement. The model can move left or right. Little tiny adjustments will still work quite nicely. So now we've got something that has kind of evolved. Next thing I'll show you, I just put an ultra bounce or the equivalent of an ultra bounce reflector. On this side, I've got it as a silver. Put softboxes on because again, like, let's have a look at what you can do if you don't have the modifiers that I'm showing you. Put it on solar, really clear, distinct catch light because we're pushing really reflective light source. Pulled it far away, so we're trying to soften it as much as possible. But this is solar light, big catch light in the eyes, getting that kind of almost like specular highlight on the nose. Let's compare them. So now we're comparing the lantern with the bounce lights on the diffusion with 2 softboxes going into an ultra bounce. Interesting shape, catch light, little flatter shape across the lip. This is where I mean like beauty becomes really about tiny differences. Maybe you look at the light here and go, I really like the fact that, you know, it's hitting here and it's about highlight on this side and it's about shade on that side. And suddenly the lip becomes like 3D. Maybe this one becomes a little too flat. They're all like small things, but they make a big difference. Coming from the side as we've got here, you see this angle that we've got. We've lost a little bit of the contouring that we've got on this side. Again, we could change that with polyboards. Because I've got a big light source, I'm still getting enough like coverage down this side of the model. So look at that from the top. You got space to move around. You could shoot video if you want to. You would want to control how much of the light is spilling around the space again. So this will give you, I think, quite a few different variations that you could work with. Let's just check this final setup. This is my strobe set. I've got a big octa. I'm bouncing it into this like ultra bounce reflector and that's pushing it back in towards the model. Angle this so you can see it changing. Okay, so we're trying to find like an area that we can bounce it back into the model and get this softer big light source. That could work quite nicely. Got that big catch light, big light source, and it's a softer fill light now. With this one, you want to begin to think, okay, where do I angle this? Here, you could have a bigger fill card now. We're trying to catch as much of that bounce light as possible. Just different ways you can really work with that light. And let's just have a look at those. I go with just the constant lighting setups. Hopefully you can see, even just from these preview images, it's really about shaping and controlling. So we've got some fairly harsh shadows on, say this one here, a little bright on this side. This is our white polyboard. This is our black polyboard because we can see it's a little bit more shaping on this side. This is our diffusion panel that we're sitting the light through. And we could tell that immediately from that preview image. And it's probably hard to see on this version, but it's because we are bringing that highlight together rather than the separated highlight here where we don't have the diffusion panel. Let's look at just some of the diffusion panels on their own. So this is the light dome into diffusion panel, the reflector heads into diffusion panel. So this is our kind of ultra bounce with a fill light going in, that light dome filling in. You can see suddenly it's more 3D shaped than this one, which is a kind of softer fill. That was our 2 light domes going through diffusion. So just different ways of working, controlling that lighting setup, allowing you to shoot video if you want to. Now let's just apply some of the learning to 2 different setups now. So I'm going to look at this image. This is a great example. Let me just zoom in, and this is just a screenshot, but let me just zoom in. See a fairly big light source. It's going to allow him range of movement if he is shooting video. Nice soft shadow under the ear. Not too shallow in the depth of focus. So, you know, maybe he is a F4, F5, 6. Nice shaping of the face. We're getting maybe a little highlight that's bouncing off the background or light that's coming across, but it's a movement from light to shade. A little bit of highlight on this area, so it's nice. A little highlight in the tip of the nose. Nice little highlight on the lips again. So, you know, maybe there's a bounce light coming back up into the face. Bigger fill card on the floor or lower down. Contouring of the body. Nice shape under the chin. Those are all the things that we can look at. And how do we begin to control these things? So I've gone with a couple of different setups now. I've got the lantern, put that on solo. See what that's doing. It's giving us that nice highlight onto the cheekbone, nice highlight onto the lips. Turn that one off for a second. I've got my 2 bounce lights that are going into my big diffusion fill light. So he's got, like I said, this little highlight on the lip here. Maybe we have a different kind of reflector here, reflector like a silver or something more than a white fill card. Just showing you what it looked like with our shoot through as well. So we've got our big diffusion panel, put a lantern through the diffusion panel, and then our 2 fill lights. Let's look at this on its own as the lantern first of all. Softer highlight now on the cheekbone than it was when it was direct. Now that it's going through that diffusion panel. Still got that highlight on the lip, but works nicely. This is our kind of shaping fill light pushing through. This is a big diffusion panel I've got now. So it's got like 3 meters by 2 meters. Maybe you have like an 8 by 8. Just different ways that you can approach this. And then looking at it as a strobe set, I could do the same thing with a strobe set. So I've got my diffusion panel in the same place. I've just put a big octa through here at power 9 and a smaller octa at power 7. Let's put this as a solo. This is our kind of fill shaping light. Again, nice shaping on the face. And then I've got a big light at the front, put that as a solo. It's doing most of the kind of work. Put them on together. A little bit too bright right now, so maybe I want to kind of bring that down a little bit or change my f-stop. If I also wanted to get more of a highlight here, I could swap this one. So let me take this like black out. I could put like a white poly, for example, in here. See in the preview image, everything's lifted a little bit. Again, it's like how much do you want to kind of contour? How much do you want to fill? This was the direct light dome, and then the 2 bounce lights. And then this is what everything was coming through the diffusion panel. Notice the separation here between the catch lights. Here we've got this kind of bigger, more unified catch light. Nicer shaping under the chin because it's a bit more direct, and then it's a softer shaping here where we've got that really big diffusion panel with everything going through it. On this side, the light dome is more direct. Strobe set version, pushing both the strobes through the big diffusion panel, got a big catch light. Needs probably a little bit of fill, something on this side. How can you do this on the cheap? Well, I've got a big softbox. It's up pretty high on this one. I could probably bring that down a little bit, but let's put that on the solo. I'm pushing it through my big half-stop diffusion panel. Still keeping the contouring. This is your simple solution. And let's just bring in this last image. Again, you can see a big light source here. So in this shoot, he's doing quite a bit of video. It's got a centered feeling to the light. Look at that lovely smooth drop off around the cheekbone area. Really nice highlights on the lip. We're not creating a massive light source, but we're trying to push light through. I'm pushing my lantern through diffusion panel. On this one, black negative fill under the chin because I want that kind of contouring shape here. Again, let's just look at the reference image. Falls off into a heavier feeling of shadow. Could be slightly higher with his main light, but I put that black negative fill underneath. My strobe set with this, again, I've just gone with an octa large, octa small, as I had done on the previous setup. Because I also want to think with my beauty here, how many looks can I shoot in a certain amount of time? Do I want to make multiple lighting setups, or can I just try and make a lighting setup that allows me to have a model posing? If you look at a preview image, it still kind of works. It's still shaping the face quite nicely when the model is moving left to right. And the thing with beauty, like I said, it's about subtle changes, but you don't want to be like moving a light every time a model moves their face. That would be like really counterproductive and really slow way of working. So other ways that we could do this, I can move these lights back, move this diffusion panel back. All I'm trying to show you now, let me just put the power back up on this. I'll balance this with the previous shot. Showing you like how big a light source do you want to create? How soft do you want it to be? Bring this like down a little more. So pulling it back softens everything off. Still nice highlights on the nose. Those negative fills really shaping the face here and here. Let's say I want to work out like how can I get something nice on the lips? Just show it from above so it's easier to see. I've just brought an octa in now. Got it on really low power. So it's on like 3.7. I've got my octa, I've got my 2 lights that are pushing from the front. Put the octa on the solo. You can see it's just really about catching a little bit on the lips and a little bit of fill light here. So this is just our strobe set with the 2 front lights going through diffusion panel. And then I've got it with the octa that's pushing this highlight into the lips. Just bring this back in. A little too much right now for the octa on the lips, but you can see kind of roughly where I'm going with that. So the other thing I could do changes to say a beauty dish. So I'm just having a different light that's coming from the side. Just bring it around a little bit. So So now I've got a different variation. I've got a beauty dish here. So let's compare those. This is 2 strobes going through the diffusion panel, 2 strobes, diffusion panel, and then we've added that octa over the top, and then I've added the beauty dish over the top. This one suddenly it lost a little bit of its kind of form and shape. This one doesn't have enough going on with the light onto the lips. But then this one with the beauty dish, suddenly it seems to fit together quite nicely for me. Got a nice shape on the nose, nice fall off onto shade on the background, shaping that face. This suddenly looks a little cleaner than the image on the left. Then all we need to do is just figure out, okay, what is our negative fill on this side? Maybe we're turning down this light a little bit, or maybe we're moving that poly. We're getting that real nice shaping. I could bring my diffusion panel up higher, more of this feeling, rather than this kind of flatter feeling. Show you what I mean with that. Okay, so now in this one, I've brought my diffusion panel up higher. I've brought my octas up a little bit higher because I've got this beauty dish also that's coming from this side. And let's see all of those together. So this is with the octa up high as a fill, beauty dish up high, and then beauty dish is in the same place, but I've just changed the position. So diffusion panel going in closer and I'm going up higher. Different feeling. So this has got more of a top-down feel to it, shaping the face. So getting a nice fall-off light to shade. This one is a little bit flatter because our diffusion panel is much further back. Bring the reference image back in. You see what I mean? Suddenly it's more about this. Maybe we'll just bring that beauty dish with a little bit more power in it, so we just bring the face forward. So there's a lot to think about with beauty, and there's varying degrees you can go to. We could start off with something simple, 2 lights, negative fill, and some bounce. That's our strobe set. We've got a fairly simple 2 light setup with our constant light, so we're pushing through a diffusion panel. Then we're getting a little bit more kind of complicated each time, but we're trying to sculpt and shape the face. I think all the things that you need to consider with beauty is how rigid is the space that you're creating for the model to kind of move in and posing. What do you have in the way of like posing tables? How many different looks can you do without changing the lighting setup each time? And also if you're doing video, how much movement can you get, either the camera movement or the model moving? Then the other thing is like really need to think about like how reflective or how matte is the makeup that you're working with. Maybe it's like super gloopy texture. Maybe you want light to really bounce off the makeup and be contrasty, or maybe you want it soft and diffused. The best thing with beauty is like find an area that you think begins to work for you. Maybe you like a super reflective light like this one or this one. Maybe you like a combination of a bounce light and then a kind of direct fill light. So hopefully that was helpful. Give some kind of reference points. Go and have a look at the photographer's work because they have some really beautiful lighting and it does vary and really great retouching. If you got questions of like anything that wasn't clear or how we get to a certain point, just let me know in the comments. And thank you as always for watching. Have a good day.